we don't have any time. We've got no time. It's closing in on us. Oh, he always sings raggedy music to the cattle as he swings back and forward in the saddle on a horse. A pretty good horse, syncopated, gaited, and there's such a funny meter to the roar of his repeater. How they run when they hear that fellow's gun, because the western folks all know he's a highfalutin, rootin' tootin' son of a gun from Arizona, Ragtime Cowboy. Talk about your cowboys, Ragtime Cowboy Joe. Oh, there's not much time. It's closing in on us. Talk about your cowboys. Ragtime Cowboy. Oh, what a cowboy. Syncopated, gaited to the roar of his repeater. How they run. Oh, how they go, they run. Oh. Set that back. We're going to need it. Set it back. We're going to need it. And I'm going to play this now again with just a little introduction. Oh, the subject of tonight's program. If you need a subject, oh friends, oh fellow sufferers, oh great travelers along the yellow brick road of the fantastic land of Oz, leading always inevitably through the yellow, red, and green fields of poppy, gleaming on the way to the Emerald City itself. Oh, fellow sufferers, be careful of the cowardly lion. He has a tendency to fall asleep at crucial moments. The subject of tonight's program is the eeriness that is beginning to permeate the lives that we live. I hesitate to call it nuttiness. It is a kind of eeriness, a kind of creeping wheatina of fear, trepidation, excitement, and little things working around the edges of the pancreas. This is not a new thing. People have always felt it in more or less degree. It keeps it's like bad weather and barometric pressure. It comes and goes throughout the history of man. You know, Tony. It comes and goes, but it's always hanging just outside the edge of the light where the fire does not quite reach. It's always there. Never changes. Guys write poems about it. Guys write things called the Ninth Symphony. People write, Goethe writes Faustus. Guys write, oh boy, it goes on and on. Ahab searches endlessly through the northern seas for the white whale with his harpoon held ready. Oh, please, don't hit me, Oh, great, whatever it is out there, look out. I'm just trying to do the best I can. Oh, look out. Oh, help. Oh, I'm okay, please. Oh, help. And the sound you have just heard, for those of you who are literal-minded, since some of these forgotten sounds in the great past of mankind are too easily forgotten. A rose is not always a rose as a rose, and the pigeons are on the grass, my friend, alas. That sound is the sound of a special flute. It's a very special flute played by the Borneo Headhunters, and it is a flute that has existed in this tribe for thousands of years. And whenever things get spooky, and they often do get spooky in the Borneo woods, especially around 2 o'clock in the morning, when things get spooky and when it really looks like it's tough, they go to the special cave under the big rock just north of the sacred mountain. And after making special signs to the transcendent moon, the head medicine shaman reaches in under the great rock, pays brief obeisance to the sacred turtle, takes out the sacred flute, and begins to blow it in the general direction towards the moon, hoping that it will not descend, whatever it is. Oh, yeah, chungalawa. Oh, look out, I'm okay. Don't help, please. And in a sense, it wards off the evil spirits of the natives of Borneo the way the Diners Club card wards off the evil spirits for many a guy living on the east side. Sometimes, like the Diners Club card, it fails. You get a bill at the end of the month, and then more troubles pile up. I wonder if it is possible to put your Diners Club card bill on your Diners Club card. I wonder. I just tell them to charge it. No, everyone secretly knows that somewhere along the line there is a dark green and white sign coming out of that Stygian blackness. It's coming closer and closer as you drive your Thunderbird through Thunderbird country. Suddenly you pass that sign. It gleams brightly in your headlights. It says, "Be prepared. Pay toll ahead." Yes, toll booth ahead. The time has come. But the eeriness and the fear that has lurked just outside, and I'm not talking about the fear of Shirley Jackson's ghosts. That's kid stuff. I'm not talking about pumpkin heads with eyes cut out of them. I'm not talking even about hounds that go loping over the moors, even if they be mastiffs with phosphorescent teeth, baying, "Ow! Ow, 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 ow! My God, hounds, you hear those hounds? Good thing I brought my 3008 Webley." God, Holmes, that sound is the most ghastly sound I have ever heard. It's the most ghastly sound I have ever heard. Shh, shh, Holmes, wait. Shh, shh, shh. God, Holmes, I'm going back to London on the next train. Yes, well, this is not what we're talking about. We're talking about a different kind of fear and what it leads to. And I listen in vain, day in and day out on the radio. I listen in vain and watch in vain, day in and day out on the television. And people are talking great, wide, beautiful, specious, wonderful, resounding, thumping platitudes. And they sit in on the very important round table discussions on the very important hours on Sunday on television. And the announcer always comes on. He says, and we now bring you a very special taped, very special program. See, they usually put the very inept announcers on the Sunday shows because ineptitude is often mistaken for honesty, a primitive honesty. We bring you a special program in our special series of public service programs, and this one is entitled The Fate of Mankind. And now we have, as on our special Fate of Mankind panel discussers, Zero Mostel, and on the right, Bertrand Russell, and there we have in the middle, there's Eric Severide, and here is June Havoc, and now here is your moderator, Steve Allen. It's very scary. And they use words like freedom, and they use words like human rights, and they use words, great big resounding cliches that have about as much meaning in actuality as, say, words like love, or words such beautiful, soft, Swiss cheese-like words, such as understanding, moral rights, and all these things. Wonderful, and I watch in vain for anyone to ever talk about the strange eeriness that is beginning to fill the air everywhere. You know, it's getting to the point where it takes more guts not to be on a panel show regarding official things than it used to be to be on a panel show regarding. It's interesting. Well, that's just part of the creeping block thinkingness that is taking over our world. It's taking it over in many subtle ways. Now, you can listen in vain and watch in vain, and you will not find much really said about the funny feeling that everybody has. Now, it does not have anything to do specifically with the most obvious questions, like the racial question, the question of this political issue versus that. It is something far more subtle and deeper and perhaps more all-inclusive than that. There have been people who have written things about this, but very few people read today, and if they do, they read Playboy. I'm talking about reading. I mean the kind of reading with footnotes and asterisks and all kinds of cross-references and bibliographies in the back. A few people have written about the dilemma of modern man. Now, the dilemma is not one that's so easily solved, just get the right political party in there, because it is much deeper and goes well into the beginnings of the 17th century. Modern man does, and his dilemma, with what they call the death of God, or the decline and fall of the absolute. And so we've come to a kind of, and no one quite knows what it is, a kind of crossroads where man has made of himself a kind of God. And he's, like most gods, an avenging one, not necessarily a loving one. And he loves most of all himself, if he does any loving at all, and his attitudes and the things he stands for. The things he hates are anybody who argues with him. And he never argues any longer on the basis of whether the argument is right or wrong or the relative merits of the argument, but on whether the man who's arguing with him is a good man or a bad man. And, of course, he's always a bad man if he does not agree en toto with your views. Intriguing problem. It has to do with the far-reaching question of orthodoxy as opposed to conformity. Speaking of, this is WOR AM and FM New York, and this is old friendly Fred here, and we'll be here until the axe falls. Now, on the subject of looking for little, there's an old axiom in writing. And it's not only an axiom, it's an actuality. It's also to be found in the work that playwrights do. It's found in the work that I occasionally do, that a good novelist does, that one illustration is worth 10,000 critical analyses. Just let it stand for itself. And so, just speaking of the kind of fear, the odd, eerie, now I'm talking about the eeriness, the spookiness of the kind of fear that is creeping over, and the kind of behaviorism that's creeping over America. And I hate to say America, because everyone likes to assume that the nuttiness in the world is an American institution. Well, forget it. There were a lot of ovens just outside of Munich just a few years ago, and I don't think we've come to that yet. This was not quite America, Germany. There were some interesting things done by the Japanese in Nanking a long time ago. So this world is a complicated one, and one of the ways that we like to reduce it into sort of a manageable thing is to assume a kind of evil for one group and goodness for another group. There's one group of people who will today always ascribe all evil to Americans or the American way of life, assuming that the American way of life is not just another facet of the human existence or all of humans, the human experience all over everywhere. Then there's another group, of course, who likes to assume quite the opposite, that all evil stems from them damn foreigners, whatever they might be. And in between, you find the people who often are in real trouble, because they like to ascribe, and I believe more rightly, they like to ascribe evil to all people and good to all people. It just takes different forms, and be careful how you put the labels on it. Now, getting back to the eeriness of the air out there, the angst, the whatever it is, many people are, perhaps luckily, on the other hand, maybe not so luckily, insulated from it. They don't think that it's there. And they assume then that anybody who mentions it is either a kook or a nut, and obviously not looking at the right things, like Norman Rockwell's paintings or reading the Reader's Digest. Everything is getting better and better every day. After a new discovery about cancer is made, it'll be all okay. Oh boy, our cancers go much deeper than merely cells do and blood streams do. There's a lot of different types of cancer, and some of them are rarely discussed. One type of cancer is the cancer of fear, and the various manifestations that it finally results in, the little outpoppings. They're not really ever reported as fear. They're usually reported as the terrible thing that happened in Kansas City, and let it go at that. Little realizing that it's a thing that's in the atmosphere that produces the thing that pops out of it. I remember Christopher Isherwood in his I Am a Camera. He was not reporting on terrible things that happening in Berlin in his book, if you remember reading it. He was reporting on a whole way of life that finally resulted in a fantastic Holocaust, a kind of permissiveness, a kind of total moral laxity, a kind of incipient, creeping fear that no one could quite lay a finger on. One thing that did develop as a result of it, if anyone ever really raised a voice about it, he was looked upon as a maniac or a kook or making too much of nothing. That was one of the favorite phrases. You're making too much of nothing. Well, I suppose, again, one of the old axioms is to take a specific instance. This is one of the eeriest little incidents I've read of in a long time. I will then follow it by an even more eerie incident, which parallels, in a way, the same. Would you please get out our sacred flute there for a minute and blow it at the moon, please, Tony? We don't want to get hit by lightning in the middle of the secret incident here. Never know, that flute might be right. It might be the best thing we have, only we don't know it. Kansas City. A woman locked a television repairman in her apartment Thursday and refused to release him until the picture on her TV set suited her to a T, he alleged yesterday. He said she hit him repeatedly with a hammer. Robert Hess, 20, reported the incident to police. He said that earlier in the week he had gone to the woman's apartment to repair the set. He was called Thursday and told the set was not working properly. He told police he was met at the door by the irate Ben Casey fan, and as he stepped inside, she slammed the door and locked it. Now, you fix that set, she demanded. Mr. Hess got out his equipment and began to work. As he stooped over the set, the woman picked up a ball-peen hammer and struck him a lusty blow on the right hip. He said she maintained her threatening attitude and the ball-peen hammer until the set was functioning to suit her, then unlocked the door, and Mr. Hess left in haste. Funny, isn't it? Well, now, I'm sure it's the thing that makes it so intriguing is that I'm sure that the woman thinks she was right in hitting a man with a ball-peen hammer so she could see Ben Casey heal broken bones properly on a TV show. Now, I'm not discussing, again, this is probably making too much of something. But remember, this was a woman in a simple Midwestern city. And I'm sure many of her neighbors sympathize with her, which, again, is getting to the problem of the inversion of attitudes. Morality, I suppose you might call it. That's a very bad word, which is never used today. And if it is used by ridiculous, idiotic, square-type people. Now, get out my little secret horn there. This is and this one is probably the most eerie of the local, and I say local because it happened in Philadelphia. That's local. This is one of the most eerie reports on the kind of fear and the behaviorism of the human animal that I've seen in some time, particularly since it's related to a specific event which is usually called fun. Fun, as we have known in the 20th century, comes in several forms. And there's the Christine Keeler form. Then there's then there's the form of the giant rallies in Nuremberg. To those who were there, apparently it was a lot of fun. So fun comes in many different packages. This is a report from the Philadelphia Inquirer, and they bill themselves as an independent newspaper for all the news. And I read to you. This is from Friday, October 11th, 1963, a story by William Weisenbach and Edward J. Hussey. The most unusual football game in the history of sports in the city of brotherly love was played Thursday behind the padlocked gates of the Germantown High School athletic field. The game had been moved in super secret fashion out of racially torn South Philadelphia. There were no cheerleaders. There were no fans, unless a score of teachers who were assigned to the game, a plainclothes policeman, 2 red car patrolmen, and the caretaker's wife and dog can be counted as fans. For the record, South Philadelphia High School defeated Bach Technical High 27-8, but nobody seemed to care, even though it was a traditional game. Tradition had turned hollow. After more than a week of racial tension marked by almost daily violence among teenagers, school authorities apparently concluded it would be dangerous to hold the game in South Philadelphia before partisan crowds. The 2 teams had expected to meet on the athletic field at 12th and Bigler Streets, a 16-acre sports paradise rebuilt for the 2 schools to share at a cost of $700,000. There were to be formal dedication ceremonies before the game. It was not to be. The 2 teams left their schools, Southern at Broad Street and Snyder Avenue, Bach at 8th and Mifflin Streets, and were herded into yellow buses. They were not told where they were going. Neither were the coaches, Southern's Anthony Mexiani and Bach's John Urban. Not even the bus drivers knew until they were handed sealed orders a few moments before departure. No military operation ever was more detailed than the instructions contained in those sealed orders. The 9-mile trip to 1100 East Sedgwick Street in East Mount Airy was laid out street by street in the sealed orders. One route for the Southern players, another route for the Bach players. Many intersections along the way were encircled. These were police checkpoints where patrolmen had been stationed in advance to prevent untoward incidents along the way. At the host field, chosen partly because Germantown High School is located 3 miles away at Germantown Avenue and High, the gates swung open silently to admit the 2 buses and a single police red car. Then they closed and were padlocked. 3 small boys from the neighborhood pressed against the high chain-link fence to watch the strange, silent performance. The small knot of teachers assigned to the game sat grimly, separately in the stands. With them were Patrolman Charles Lapp of the Juvenile Aid Division, who needed only a radio for help to bring an army of policemen to the scene, and a reporter. They were joined soon after the silent kickoff by a woman who said she was the field caretaker's wife. Sitting with her a short distance from the educators was her pet German Shepherd. Both coaches were visibly upset. "I can't say anything," Ciani told the reporter. "No comment," snapped Urban. Stanley Peffel, assistant director of physical ed for the school system, cut off a question with, "No comment." Period. There was little that could be said, really. Nothing, at least, that could erase the sad commentary of teenage athletes, white and Negro alike, putting on their uprooted display of sportsmanship at a place kept absolutely secret from their own classmates in the fear that it might touch a match to a riot. The contest in the silent vastness of the strange arena was won handily by Southern, proud public school champions a year ago. When it ended, the cheerless players left the field quickly to enter their buses and to leave the eerie atmosphere. The lumbering buses waited at the gates for several moments until the locks were sprung, and then they were gone. Just thought you ought to know. Now, these seemingly isolated incidents are not really isolated incidents. There is, and has again, I must say, that immediately the first thing that both sides do, and this is the thing that generates fear, is to assign the role of the evildoer to the other side immediately and without question. And yet there is that great specter of some kind of fear floating over everybody. Nobody quite knows what it is. It brings into focus a thing that George Orwell said a long time ago, back in the 1930s. And Orwell was interested in this thing that makes people go into and become part of vast totalitarian systems. And one of the things that he pointed out was that fear itself drives people into a search for a totalitarian system. Now, when we think of a totalitarian system, we think in terms of a dictator. We just think that some rotten person came and yelled at everybody, and they all got in line, and then they became under a dictator, like he hit them all. No, it's a little more complex than that. And one of the things that drives people into a totalitarian form of government or thinking is fear of the unknown. That one thing under a totalitarian government that you have no fear of the unknown, because the shaman, the headman, the government, or whatever it is that you have finally put up there above you, even if it's a piece of marble that just stands there and looks enigmatically at you, this thing takes all responsibility for both good and evil. Not only that, it does one more important thing. It takes over the role of thinking. It takes over the role of making any kind of decisions, both moral and spiritual and or intellectual. And this is a secret desire that many of us, in fact all of us underneath it all, have, to get off the hook, to get some kind of a big cop-out. And so I notice around me more and more a kind of groupthink that Orwell talked about. Orwell talked about fear driving people into groupthink. Now, groupthink is not necessarily a right-wing thing, nor is it a left-wing thing. It is a people thing. And usually you'll find 2 or 3 great groupthink blocks in any one specific society. Now, groupthink means a group of people who have gathered together and have secretly shaken hands to think alike on all issues in a set of issues. If a set of issues are given, they think in this group. And I'll show you how it works. Today, if you inadvertently happen to say, let's just take if you say, I am against permissive education, let's just say that you do say that. I'm against permissiveness in education. I think that there's been too much permissiveness as far as children are concerned, and I believe a kid is a kid and is not yet able to make any kind of adult decisions like sex and one thing and another, and I think that there's too much permissiveness in this field. If you say that in certain circles, automatically it is assumed that you are also pro-segregationist. Are you aware of that? Now, I've seen that in action many times. And when I say aware of that, I'm talking to somebody in the control room. I'm sure that many of you are. That, for example, if you were to say, I am for, let's say, if I am for, on the other hand, if you say, I am for integration completely and I'm for racial integration down the line, immediately somebody believes you're a communist. Now, that's another kind of groupthink. What the two have in common, very few people seem to know, or why. Why, for example, does permissiveness in education, what does this have to do with, say, racial integration in Mobile? And yet the two are coupled. Because the words, because of the use of the hocus pocus use of words, that the word freedom has become a word which literally covers almost anything you want to do or say or feel. If you want to get a whole set of beliefs put out, that this kind of groupthink has so many ramifications. I've noticed, for example, talking to groupthinks on the right. Now, the far right have their, of course, they have their whole set of things. One of their things is if you're for Social Security, we'll just take an example. If you're for Social Security, somehow they assume that you're for, let's say, and again, I happen to be for it, but if you're for Social Security, they will assume you're also for, let's say, racial integration. Now, somehow the two are always coupled, although they bear no relationship. And yet, this is constantly done on both sides. One of the more subtle ones, though, is the belief that if you are for any kind of discipline, particularly if you're for self-discipline, you're obviously for right-wing political theories. That's an intriguing thought. Yes, that's true. In fact, I had a discussion with somebody. We were just discussing in open conversation. We were discussing, let's say, educational theories. And in the course of discussion, I said, well, I'm not necessarily, I do not agree entirely with the idea of permissiveness in teenage children entirely, because I do not believe that a child, whether or not he wants to concede he is a child, can make decisions that could very well affect his entire life and those around him. And immediately there's a silence, and the guy says, "Well, I presume you're also for the Birch Society." This was I said, "What are you talking about?" And yet those two are coupled. Now this never used to be the case. Don't assume immediately that it was. I think one of the intriguing problems today is that hardly any discussion is ever based on what we're discussing. In short, if let us say if X is accused of something, we'll just say just on a wild let's just take something out of the air. If X is discovered with 17 rolls of microfilm in his sock drawer, in his closet, in his pad, 17 rolls of microfilms containing all the secret plans for all known military installations in the U.S. And next to that roll of microfilm is let's say a receipt from the Russian intelligence department paying for 1,600 gross of latest secrets last month to the tune of, say, $12,000. Now, if somebody were to say aloud, I think maybe it's possible that guy was a communist spy, automatically 16,000 people will jump up and holler that you're a McCarthyite. Well, the point is they will never discuss whether or not he was a communist spy. Again, it might now immediately everybody's jumping up saying Shepard is obviously a right-winger. Merely because I pointed this interesting kind of emotional attitude towards a purely a factual discussion, which might be or might not be carried on, hypothetically, parenthetically non-existent. So the kind of groupthink that is going on today is a kind of groupthink which is so pervasive and so subtle that it is almost impossible to separate group thinking from individual passions, individual actual ideas. It's very hard in a life that is dominated pretty much by non-identity in most people's worlds, most people's actual place of business. Very few people work today in an area, in the kind of work that gives them any kind of dignity at all. This is, I see it here, I see it in most places that are big and complex in this 20th century life. Their dignity has been stripped from them. They have become very easily replaceable. That their members, if at all, if the higher they get, the more important the committees they belong to, which is an undignified place for a man to be constantly on a committee, to never have any responsibility for a decision, not really in the ultimate sense, to kind of abdicate to polls abdicate to mechanical means of finding out what the public wants and then pre-testing it before it goes on until finally we know absolutely how it's going to be, and if it doesn't work out that way, blame the machine. So this is a kind of stripping of dignity which is not really discussed much when they talk about automation. Well, what does this do to a person? What does it really do to a man who feels that he's pretty worthless? And of course, another thing that's happened is almost a concomitant result too, is the crossing over of the line of the sexes too. You don't even have the dignity of literally being a sharp demarcation. You don't have the dignity of saying I am a woman or I am a man. Today it is we are all persons, and as though no sex difference exists at all. So in the end, you will find that this has caused a kind of uneasiness among all peoples. And so about the only thing they can do to compensate for that is to attach themselves to some kind of without thinking usually. That's where the difficulty lies. Without actually looking around them to assay a situation or an event, or even to bother to read about it, even to bother to make any investigation of these things, to align yourself unrelentingly and completely and totally committed to a set of doctrine. If you can't find yourself being able to be committed at work to your job, if you can't find yourself to be able to be committed, let's say, to the girl you know or to the man you know, you can at least be committed to a set of doctrine, a dogma. And the more insecure you are as a person, the more apt you will be to be passionately, wildly involved in some kind of a groupthink project. And project is a favorite word among group thinkers, because it does not mean job that I'm doing. It means project that all of us are doing. It's a kind of cop-out there, too, which has all sorts of ramifications. Now, I may sound like I'm against projects. That's not true. Not at all. Remember, I hate to have to present credentials, but I'm not going to. However, I do feel, though, that there is a subtle thing in the air today that has hardly ever been reported on. It's certainly never in literature, rarely touched on, never in drama. It's a totality of a kind of uneasiness. And so you'll see one little aspect of it touched, let's say, in a play. You'll have the sexual unease touched upon, let's say in a play by Albee or Tennessee Williams. But they never seem to carry it over into, let's say, the political area. How does that affect the person politically? We assume that if we believe in a series of right words, we'll be saved. These words have a kind of magic symbolism to us, just like secret passwords have to more primitive tribes. A primitive man will sit on his haunches in some far distant jungle, and he will repeat a word over and over and over. Have you ever seen areas where men will sit with prayer wheels and spinning the prayer wheel, hoping that repeating a certain set of words enough times will get them some kind of salvation from whatever it is that they fear? And so we use these words often as a shaman. We use these words as a kind of symbol, really, I suppose is a better word. We use it as a shield. Now, the word, then, in the actual sense of what the word means or does not mean, loses a meaning. It loses a meaning just the way if you take a word, let's take the word could, and just say it to yourself several times. Look carefully at the letters. You do that long enough, and the word has no meaning at all. Just a simple word has no meaning. You take a word like freedom. It has no meaning at all anymore. Just like the word communist has no meaning. Most people apply the word communist to somebody they don't like. Many people do. I shouldn't say most. Many people do. You'd be surprised at the number of letters that I will get. Somebody didn't like a show I do, so they say I'm a communist right away. Or on the other hand, it goes the other way around. If somebody listens to one show and I have done something that he likes, he assumes that I ascribe to all of the various facets of the particular area of groupthink to which he belongs. And a couple of days later, he will hear me say something that shocks him, because he says, well, here you said you were for integration, and then all of a sudden you come along and you say you're against free love. What is this? Meaning that he can't discuss things separately. He cannot discuss two separate situations as what they are. Two separate situations. They are all part of a large tablet or groupthink of things that he believes completely, unreservedly, and without any kind of thinking. The value of groupthink, of course, is that it makes it easy. If you accept one tenet of a platform, all the rest go along. You don't have to do all that thinking. You don't have to go along and do all that separate analyzing as you go down the line. And so it's very hard. For years, I found it difficult when somebody comes up and interviews me and says, what are you, a Democrat or a Republican? Well, now how can you say such a thing? You're a Democrat or a Republican. Both parties have all kinds of things they stand for. I may agree with some of the things that the Republicans say and disagree violently with large areas of what they think. On the other hand, I may agree passionately with many things the Democrats say and disagree violently with a lot of other things. And yet, we love to have such labels because it gives us a sense of belonging at least to something. We belong to a group of people who dig all of one thing. They dig this whole thing unreservedly. And then one of the beautiful parts of groupthink is this. The groupthink is almost always based on the premise that there is a large organized enemy and that we stand as a bulwark of moralistic, beautiful people with all of our great moralistic, beautiful beliefs against that large, organized, rotten, sadistic majority enemy. They're always the majority over there, whatever they might be. Now, this you'll find on both sides of the fence. I have discussed this thing with, say, when I was doing a program on television in another city. I had the rare experience to discuss it with, say, the leader of the American Nazi Party. He talks exactly the same way as, say, the leader of a great liberal organization about that unknown great enemy that's out there, that's standing to beat moral people to the ground. And it's fascinating to find that the arguments of two kinds of groupthink people almost run parallel. This is why, in the end, as Orwell pointed out, in the end, it is very easy to get groupthink believers together, because the one thing that the groupthink thinkers agree on, and that is the comfort of groupthink. And so if you can get them together on that one point, you'll have them under one large, tremendously monolithic, self-defeating, and I might say in the end, usually totally destructive banner. So it's an interesting world we're living in. And there are strange currents that have little to do with what appears on the surface. This law to be passed, or that law. This bill to be argued before Congress. This decision to be made. There is something afoot, and that little old flute is still a-blowing as best it can. Still a-blowing. Oh, you should reach. Call him out there. Oh, yeah, but I don't. Oh, hello, old moon up there. Oh, it's all right. I'm a friend. I can't hear you. He's not listening. Blow that flute louder.